It's time for Promoter 101, the podcast, hosted by Steiny.
Promoter 101, put your kosher sausage in a Steiny bun. This is Craig Newman from APA, going to be live on Promoter 101.
Welcome to Promoter 101, Episode 10. I'm Dan Steinberg.
And I'm Luke Pierce.
'Tis the season to get caught up on paperwork and clear your desk, and possibly rework some of those systems. This week's podcast comes to you just in time as many of you are doing holiday travels. So if you're hearing this and just hitting TSA right now, bon voyage, motherfuckers.
First, the weather. It's cold as shit. I'm in Brookings, South Dakota. It's literally negative 28. Negative 28, Dan. Can we have a fucking civilization, please?
Stop being such a wuss, Luke.
I was standing outside my hotel this morning in Brookings, and I had a client with a steaming hot cup of tea. He threw it up in the air, and it froze midair. I shit you not. You got to get me to Florida for the holidays, please.
A client? It's got to be home free, right? You talking about Tim?
I'm talking about Tim Faust from Home Free. There's literally video of this. I'm not kidding you. We're outside of a Hampton Inn in Brookings, South Dakota this morning, and Tim had a cup of tea, walked outside, threw it up in the air, and it froze midair. I'm not joking. We'll post that video.
100%?
Fuck you, Dan. Please, some real news, please. Dan, of course, for our listeners out there, is alluding to the fact that I tend to say 100% a lot, which is 100% true. I do say 100% a lot. It's just something that has become part of the vernacular. And Dan, and a few listeners, more than a few, it sounds like, have pointed that out.
It's become the newest drinking game, apparently, that going around the industry. We listen to the podcast, and anytime Luke says 100%, you drink. You'll be schnicked by the end of the podcast for sure.
Well, we'll have to try that game at Polestar together. We'll put some Patron out on the table, and every time I say 100%, everybody in the room in real time will have to drink.
I think we're a morning panel, so that should be really interesting, especially because it'll fall on the same night as the annual party that we throw.
Very much looking forward to that.
Might have to take a nap in between, though, huh?
Yeah, we'll lie down on a couch somewhere, I'm sure. Let's get to some real news, Dan. What do we got?
Anthrax wrote a letter to Irving Azoff talking about GMR, worrying about it affecting their radio airplay. I'm concerned that those guys haven't had a radio hit since I was in grade school, so I don't know that it's really going to hit Irving's level.
Yeah. WME Nashville is moving to some new digs over the holiday. Friday is going to be their last day. Their new space is a killer building on Demumbrian in Nashville, sharing that building with Sony Nashville and some others. Congrats to all our friends in the 615 WME office.
On December 11th, Florida Electric Records executive Bob Krasnow passed away. Our condolences go out to Bob's family and the rest of the industry that knew him so well.
In important, non-distracting news, Donald Trump and Kanye West met this past week in Trump Tower, New York. I'm sure it was very frank and productive.
Sure. Get those two guys in a room and hope nothing bad happens.
They talked about life, apparently, was the topic of discussion. And then Kanye West and Donald Trump posed in the lobby of the Trump Tower and for a photo where Kanye didn't speak for most of the time. And when prompted, said, "I'm just trying to take a photo." So very clear that our president-elect has priorities in line, meeting with the leader of the free world of his own mind, Kanye West. Let's take a moment, break down what's going on in the mind of Dan Steinberg this week while tweeting with hashtag Promoter101. This is the section of the podcast each week where we spend some time talking about the happenings in the music business through the hashtag Promoter101 lens. If you're not following Dan on Twitter, he is at the Jew. Right now, we're going to take a moment, break down some of the tweets. Dan's going to tell us what was going on when these things happen. First up this week, the magical feeling that comes when an artist you never really want to work with, but had to submit on because you have your friends back, passes on your offer.
This one was special because I love the agent a lot, and I had to submit, and it's really not an act I ever wanted to do. So when the act passed, it was a magical, magical experience, as I tweeted out earlier this week. Sometimes it's great.
You mean you're genuinely happy about that, right? You don't want to take that act.
Oh, no, I'm going to say it's a Yanni type act. It wasn't Yanni, but it's right up there and something that, I couldn't give tickets away to. And I was really glad when it went away.
Lovely. When you co-promote a sold-out show and you find yourself in Polestar and your co-promoter failed to list you when reporting the date.
Yeah, this was great. This was a special co-promoter that left us off on the marquee, the ticket, and then the show sold out and they reported it and left us off on the report as well. Now, we did a couple of these dates with them, and when we handled everything else, we included them on everything. So it really kind of felt unequal, if you know what I mean. Very classy.
I want to welcome to the podcast a freshly showered Nate Stone, Home Free's merchandise manager, who's currently sitting in this office with me right now as I podcast this, and some other folks from Home Free as well, too, sitting here in Mankato, Minnesota. Hello to the world out there. Lovely.
So is Nate wearing anything, or is it au naturel?
Nate's presently wearing a towel here, and Abe Nielsen of Emporium Presents, who's also in the room with me, is happy to just shake his head at this whole experience. So this is the life out on the road, folks. It's real shit. So let's keep it rolling, Dan. Now that we're less distracted and that Nate has left the room, let's get to the next Promoter 101 tweet. When a club acts, fan club will not leave you alone.
It's amazing. More of these fan club VIPs are being added to every level of show, and you get some of these acts that are playing 300-seaters and are only selling 50 tickets, and you can't stop but getting a phone call every 20 minutes from the VIP fan club setup about getting them all hooked up with a show that's not going on sale for another month. Drives me nuts. It's like, send us the sheet. We'll get to you in time, I promise.
Well, considering we work with a few club acts, I hope that's none of my acts that are out there, Dan. I know how persistent those folks at places like Songkick Applause and the like can really be.
I'd like to say it wasn't one of your acts.
I'd like you to say that it wasn't one of my acts as well, too. That'd be great. But don't want to speak too confidently in this situation because I know how fucking hounding those people can be to people.
Well, it absolutely wasn't Home Free. I will say that.
Great. When an artist has a total of 2 shows in a single state, it does not qualify as a North American tour.
Look, if you're only doing 2 shows, it's not a tour, first of all. But it's not a North American tour unless you're playing 2 countries. I'm talking Mexico, Canada, the United States. Shit, call Texas a country if you want. I need at least 2 different places on the map if you're going to call it a North American tour that crosses a border. That's just fair. And by the way, 2 cities is not a goddamn tour. It's just not. It's a weekend.
Fair enough. When loadout comes with a wind chill factor of negative 31 degrees, hashtag give it up for the road crew.
All right, well, I'm sure you'll be proud of this one because it was a Home Free show, one of your clients. Last night, so cold, and man, you got to hand it to the crew. They keep you on time, they keep you on schedule, they deal with the weather. It was cold everywhere in the Midwest this week, but the shows play, the fans get their show, and the bus rolls on to the next city. And we wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for the amazing road crew and local production hands that make that happen.
I saw somebody comment on this on your Facebook post that's the union crew earning their wage, but seriously, amazing job by the crew last night in Brookings, South Dakota, where I think wind chill was actually lower than negative 31 degrees. It was something like negative, and people here are shaking their heads in the room here. It's like something like negative 40 or negative 50 degrees in the room, which is just literally dangerous. So props to them for some great work last night.
It literally becomes ice road trucking for the drivers and the bus drivers, too, of the trucks, of the semis and the bus drivers, getting you guys from city to city safe, not just Home Free, but all the other acts like working hard in the middle of winter. It's cold out there, and what happens when metal meets frozen ice coming over the pavement? It's scary, and the fans somehow forget what happens when they leave, and what it takes to get from one city to the next is dangerous work. It's hard enough when the roads are dry and there are just a lot of miles to go, but when you add in the ice and all the other elements and whiteout conditions and freezing temperatures, man, these guys are fighting a war to keep rock and roll on the road, and I'm just proud of them.
I'll also say this as well, too. Props to the fans for just coming out to the show in those kind of conditions. I know that those people live and breathe in that part of the world, but I think last night we had more than 85% of the fans that had paid for tickets actually show up into a pretty big room last night. So props for them for making it out of your house. I know I certainly would have stayed at home. So thanks for making it a great experience. First interview this week is a record executive that made the leap in artist management. Dan and Jamie Loeb had the opportunity to sit down with the wonderful Mark Cates during the recent Aspen Live conference. Here's a clip of that interview.
Promoter 101, it's night 4 at Aspen Live. Luke is headed back to do some management work, so Jamie is stepping in. Jamie Loeb's back with us tonight. Thanks for being here, Jamie.
Thank you for having me.
Our special guest from the record and management side of the business, our good friend Mark Cates, is here at Aspen Live and joining us in the suite. Thanks for being here, Mark.
It's my pleasure.
So give us a little history. You started on the record side of things and have moved into management at this point of the world and been successful at both, but you're kind of done on the record side, right?
Yeah. I live in Boston, which is where I'm from. I came up in the scene there in the early 80s, and I was inspired by it and got a job working for an indie label there, and then one in LA, and that led to a job at Geffen, where I was for 10 and a half years, which was totally unbelievable. Weirdly, with time, it becomes more unbelievable. but I guess that makes sense.
You know what was really interesting is I noticed at the conference today that there was a bunch of people that said I used to be at a label. And that was the theme of the intros as everybody went through and introduced who they were today, which is a great thing to wait till the last fucking day to do. But I noticed so many people said I used to be at a label, and I was looking around the room because
a recovering label executive.
We've all been coming to this conference for a very long time, and I think we all remember that it was all about which record label are you going to dinner with, because they have the expense account. And nobody's here that currently has a job at a label anymore.
Yeah. You're talking about 22 years, though. I mean,
no, it's been a change, but
well, first off, to be fair, Rob Sides coined that phrase, and it's very easy to repeat because it really says it all. Although some of us say recovered.
But at the end of the day, there aren't a lot of guys in the room that can claim that they get any revenue from a label anymore directly as a salary at all. And that used to be a thing. Like, there always was a couple guys.
Right.
But that seems to have evaporated the same way as there's nobody from CAA or William Morris here this week either, or Paradigm, I believe.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
There's not a shortage of agents or managers or promoters here, but no one from Live Nation, no one from William Morris, no one from Paradigm, no one from CAA.
Well, like I was thinking about the Live Nation thing, and I'm like, oh, yeah, Rapino was here 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So,
we're friends on Facebook, me and that guy.
Someone from Ticketmaster is here, but not from Live Nation proper.
No, I mean, Fergie's here, and technically Tour Design is owned by Live Nation. But
to be fair, Aspen is our thing, that those of us that come. And, it was great this year to have people come back that haven't been in a while. Like, the first time I came here was right after I left Geffen, and I had started working at the Beastie Boys label, Grand Royal Records, which ended up being completely by accident part of the theme of famous Dee Gordon event, which has been
amazing. And I believe Grand Royal's now in the hands of the guys that are at Stiletto who do
Barry Manilow.
It's Barry Manilow. Yeah, it's David Britz wound up acquiring it, I believe, before he left with Straight No Chaser. So to figure that Barry Manilow's people handle Grand Royal at this point is the weirdest thing.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that.
I believe that's right.
Bankruptcy, so I don't know anything
they bought
about
it out of bankruptcy. That's how that happened.
No, it was.
You were saying you'd done 11 years at Geffen, give or take?
Yeah, and then I went to Grand Royal, so the first time I came to Aspen, I was there. So I didn't really have an expense account. But, I mean, it was very different. It was, well, see, again, I was going to say a reflection of, like, some of the powerful people at the time. But it was truthfully a reflection of some of the powerful people at the time, some of whom like to ski. Like, it's just a reality. I mean, you guys come here and probably get as excited about what you do as we do about that. But it does set it apart uniquely. Also, the time of year is just not realistic for people. And I know, to go back to why we're actually here, part of what we do these days, I don't talk about very much because it's not really a big thing, is curate a live series. And it's basically us kind of keeping our name out there, which started when we were a label. But also, I DJ, we try and do things with people that are friends and family. It's just kind of a thing that we've been doing.
DJ Carbo.
Thank you.
Which you didn't make an appearance this year.
I mean, I wasn't asked, to be really honest with you. And it wasn't like I didn't poke around a little bit, but that's all right. I got a phone. We can, we can do it whenever you want.
I'm down, man. We'll turn the suite into a party room. Where's Harlan Fry? Let's make this happen. Speaking of labels not being in the room, and that's the one guy from the conference that still works for a label. Harlan's still at Atlantic.
Yes, but when you think back to those early days, that was the heyday of Sony and RCA, and there was some serious cash flowing.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Jay Scavo would take everyone to dinner.
Yeah.
I miss that.
It was different. I mean, again, it's so weird because the Dee Gordon thing was like maybe even the first meeting I ever went to, and all the stuff she was talking about was not making sense to a lot of people there, and what she was talking about was the world I was in, and honestly, coincidentally. And a lot of people were pissed off. Someone literally said, I don't know if you guys remember this, so tell us which bands to sign. And I felt like I was in
such
like
bullshit.
Old school, ignorant environment, whereas what it is now is completely the opposite.
Completely different. I love the way that this conference is mutated. I think that it is relevant in a way that it wanted to be and couldn't be back then.
Because if you try to be the Allen and Company Sun Valley meeting, which is an insane, to even say that out loud is amazing to me. I mean, I love it, but, And
he did. He did say it out loud today.
Well, and I'm one of the people, especially after the Michael Moore thing, and I think it was after the Michael Moore thing, I'm like, dude, there's plenty here. There's more than enough.
I thought he was going to have a fucking heart attack, man. It looked like he was coked out. Like he was like, I was hanging with Hunter Thomas, saw him 4 hours late, but it was like, guy was sweating like mad, had to sit down the second he got down. It was like, man, he's been doing lines with Hunter. That's fucking awesome. Wow. Not that Michael Moore ever admitted to doing lines, but I think we all know what somebody on coke looks like.
There you have it. And now it's like we can attract new people. It can be more reasonable. It's been a fascinating thing just to attend because it's so much about Jim. And we all love Jim so much. And he's managed to assemble this insane group of people.
But you were also in a different place when you started attending this conference than I was. I was an assistant, and Jim, out of the kindness of his heart, said, "You need to go," because Missy said she needs to go. And so to be in a room with heavy hitters, and I'm, 24 years old, don't know my ass from a hot rock. I mean, I've been putting on shows and I've been doing stuff. So yes, I knew stuff, but there are people that I never would have met and or definitely not had the same relationship with had I not been able to come to this conference. And being able to pick up the phone and say, "Hi, this is Jamie Loeb. I'm a fellow Aspenite," and have my call picked up immediately has definitely served me well from this conference. And so, yes, I will forever be indebted.
So your career is completely made by Aspen Live then, Mark?
Yes. Especially, just say the phone's been ringing tonight. No.
So for those of you who weren't here, and unfortunately, and I wish, in hindsight, I should have recorded it, but Jake Gold, a manager from Canada, had decided to play out a little drama about how an industry works with an artist, a manager, an agent, a lawyer, a promoter, and a record label. And Mark played the manager tonight, and it was a really entertaining moment to get to make fun of everything that actually really happens in our industry a good amount of the time. And it was a lot of fun. And unfortunately, we didn't fucking record it, which we really should have.
They didn't?
No.
Oh, good. Oh, so relieved. I really am. No, I'm sorry.
But it was awesome.
That's the main thing I thought about at that meal, by the way.
Is it out there? Is it out there? Is it out there?
Well, it's like whatever. I said it.
They have the VR guys did the video of it, so they have it.
Right.
They're trying to do a promo for. No, I'm going to edit this part out, but they're going to try and edit it out for a promo for Aspen Live for next year, which will never happen.
Whether it should be in the podcast or not. The whole thing with Jake, we started talking about this last year, and you're like, we got to do CMW, and like, let's just do something. And then we did it there, and you weren't able to make it. This was much better, though.
Well, it's totally funny because I had talked to you when we were here last year about coming to Canada, and I was like, this is a great time. We should do this. And he's like, I'm in. Get them to send me an invite. And they when they invite you, they pay for everything. And it was one of those things where it's like, dude, you had bands playing anyway, right?
Yeah, it turned out we launched the White Long album there. It was absolutely perfect.
Timing's right. So timing's perfect, but we're both going, and like we're going to hang, and we were both like, we're going to fucking hang in Toronto. This is going to be epic, and it's going to be a great time. And we were both looking forward to it. And then right before, I had a family emergency. I could not get on the plane, and I missed what was an epic hang. So Jake gets off the plane here and is like, we're doing it. I'm like, dude, I'm speaking 2 days in a row already. There's no possible way that anybody wants to hear anyone speak for a third day in a row. It's too much. I'm Steinied out myself. I'm pretty sure everybody else could give anyone else a chance to speak. And Donnie did a great job.
Did? Yeah, all right. We don't need to belabor the...
Well, let's talk about the record label days when you went from Grand Royal and moved on to...
I left Grand Royal and started my own company. It's sacrilege to say this when you live there, but I never wanted to stay in L.A. I mean, what Bob said yesterday about you got to spend 2 years figuring out who's full of shit, which is most people, was one of the most brilliant things. And, the place was extremely good to me. I can't even, that's putting it mildly, but I never wanted to put my roots down there. I saw a lot of people from Massachusetts, for lack of a better way of putting it, become Lakers fans. And though I am kind of a Kings fan, I didn't want to be stuck there, I guess is what I would say. And so Grand Royal merged with another label. It was a complicated scenario. It's a whole other topic. I knew that I was not going to be staying there because there were too many, as Darren Harmon called it at the time, the Hall of Presidents, which is hilarious and very true. But so I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do. And the first thing I knew that I wanted to do was leave LA, if at all possible. I was up for a big job in New York. I had all these weird things happen at once. I got into this situation with the band Dispatch, connected them with Sean Fanning through Mike McGinley, who has been at Aspen once. Probably that'll be
the Goon.
The Goon, Mike McGinley. And I was kind of pursuing things independently as an A&R person with the idea of setting up my own label, but I hadn't started yet. Like when everyone went to see the Doves Strokes show at the El Rey, when everyone was trying to sign the Strokes, and I met Ryan Gentles, I'm like, this is really cool. Everyone in the world is chasing you. I would love to be part of that, but I can't even tell you what I'm doing. So I thought what I'd learned how to do in LA was put out independent records. Like I thought I'd worked at Big Time Records, which was the job I moved out there for, where I got to work with people like Love and Rockets and the Hoodoo Gurus and Alex Chilton. It was amazing stuff at the time. And then 10.5 years at Geffen, and then 3 years at Grand Royal. But it turns out what I had really learned how to do is spend other people's money. And I was kind of too far along to do it in the humble way that you have to. Even at that time.
I would like to point out real quick that Love and Rockets is still cool now, not just at the time.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other podcast. Well, first of all, we had to kill classic rock for our music to reach people. It's true. Like, especially as a radio format. Like, we had to wedge in there. So very quickly and very expensively, I learned that lesson. And it was good. And you know what? One of the really important things at a time like that is who actually is paying attention to anything you're doing. Because, as I like to say, you're really not allowed to leave LA in the music business and move to Boston. It's preposterous. But during that time when I was doing stuff that was not reaching a lot of people, fortunately it was reaching a lot of the right people. That was one of the things I was able to transmit into that job. Coming here, spending time with people here, being able to talk about what I'm doing, them caring about it was a big thing.
Here in Aspen?
Correct.
Okay.
Here at what is now called Aspen Live.
Well, I wasn't sure if you meant now here is home is in Boston.
Right. No. I mean, truthfully, like the music scene that I grew up in 100% inspired me to do this for a living and do college radio and everything about it and being a fan. Now it's just, I'd rather live there. And it actually isn't the dynamic music market that it used to be because all of our media has been wiped out. And we had 2 radio stations, the Phoenix, incredible print space in the Globe and Herald. Everyone who's listening to this that was involved with breaking artists in the 90s knows what you could do in Boston at that time. It was one of the 5 most important cities in the country, I think.
I think it would still arguably be called one of them too as well.
I hope so. It's
I mean, just based on the market size.
right. Well, it's maybe the #1 country market, which is completely not my world, but all I know is when I talk to people whose world it involves, what they tell me is insane. And Taylor Swift's first stadium show, Kenny Chesney's only stadium shows of 2017. I might as well be talking about I don't know, the credentials of the cabinet members right now. But anyway.
I think we might be a little better off if Taylor was in the office. So the words I have most heard when I first came to Aspen was, and you've always been very well respected in the room, so it's like one of those things when you're a kid and you come the first time and standing next to Andy Summers trying to figure out who everybody in the room is. It's like, who's the guy in the hat? And she's like, it's Mark. It's like, who's Mark? He's like, he's got great ears. If he tells you to listen to a band, listen to that band. The word great ears, and that's high praise in this industry, especially from somebody like Andy.
I agree. That's nice. I hope it's true. I mean,
let's run through the hit list of bands that you have the opportunity to work with on your personal label side and now in management.
Right. Well, there's nothing on my label side that anyone's going to remember other than I released a Guster album in the UK, which is something I was really psyched about, an album called Keep It Together because it's really good. And I did work with Dispatch and put out the singer's first solo album. And those were both bands that most people that have known me for a long time wouldn't necessarily expect me to get into. But you want to hear a hit list. So Mission of Burma was the band that inspired me to get into the music business, and I worked at their label in Boston. A lot of what I did was I wasn't the manager. I wasn't the agent. Things are very defined in this environment. And when you work at a label, what you do has most to do with what your orientation is. And I was lucky to work with a lot of incredible people and bring people there, and one thing would lead to another. And for me, like the first thing in my career that I got most involved with in the biggest possible way was the alternative radio format and just pushing it and just finding people anywhere. Like in LA, these bands could play at the Universal Amphitheater, which was such a big deal, or Depeche Mode at Dodger Stadium. I mean, stuff that even now is barely hard to believe happened. So we had to get our culture across. And
this is like as Lollapalooza as a festival.
Right.
Is first starting to happen, right? It's not. And I'm not talking about the Chicago Festival. I'm talking about the original tour.
Correct.
When Perry put together 9 bands, not 1,916 stages over 2 days.
Correct.
But 2 stages on the road. I think it became 3 at one point, but there's like 14 bands. It wasn't like anything that we see now.
It's really good that you brought that up because it's kind of an example of whatever my hit list is. You know, I'm one of many people that had an important role. But when you bring up Lollapalooza the first year, Jane's Addiction headline, just below them were Susie and the Banshees, who almost from the day I got to Geffen, I became their A&R person because the guy that signed them left and is one of the people who got me my job there. And I didn't even realize some of the things I was doing when I was doing them, which in a way was great. But that was an incredible thing because, you know, there's a lot of people that deserve a lot of credit, and this is Promoter 101, so I don't think I'm going to bother doing it that way. That happened through a number of different things that happened, one of which was an Echo and the Bunnymen New Order Gene Loves Jezebel tour that happened in 1987, a month after I got to Geffen. So
wait, hit that lineup again. What was that show?
Echo and the Bunnymen, New Order, and Gene Loves Jezebel. They didn't even know what to call me at Geffen at that point because I had been there a month. And so I worked with Gene Loves Jezebel. I had spent many hours of my life, in particular, watching Echo and the Bunnymen and getting to know those guys. And I was a huge New Order fan. Like, really, you're going to pay me to go to Chicago and Detroit and Minneapolis with this tour? That's what I'm doing this weekend? Like, I mean, and there was other crazy shit. The Banshees played with David Bowie at Anaheim Stadium the first week I got to Geffen. I've been reliving this a lot lately because various biggest things from that time have been in my mind, spending time with Gersh, who I worked with really closely on a lot of stuff.
Gary.
Yes, Gary Gersh, sorry. So when I look back on it now, the first month or 2 months were insane. Not just like I have this job at this big record company, which actually, from its inception, hadn't been very successful. I always like to say the album that got me my job was the Whitesnake album, because it was probably budgeted to sell about 100,000 copies, and it was at about 400,000 when I started working there. And, it was this weird roster of like the classic people like Elton John and Neil Young and Donna Summer, and bands were being signed like Lloyd Cole, and XTC was there, and the Banshees were there, and the A&R people didn't feel, Gary was one of the main ones the whole time he was there, didn't feel like there were people in the company who could actually market the music and knew it. And
Donna Summers and Echo just don't seem to go together.
No, well, we didn't have Echo, unfortunately, but
well, Susie, take your pick of
Donna Summer and
amazing
Susie,
acts.
You're right. The place is its whole history. It's frustrating when people that didn't work there talk about it, because it was very special and unique, and it didn't always translate properly in public. And, now it didn't help things that we might have been trying to do, that there was a David Geffen Neil Young lawsuit about Neil Young not making creative albums. I mean, it's like anything. And I think what concerns me the most about where anything is going in the music business is like that kind of controlled insanity in a way, like business about art at a really high level with people who really cared about it, doing really great things. It does still happen, but there was a culture that existed at record labels, like to go back to what you were talking about, what it was like at Aspen Live in the late 90s, that will never exist again. And some of it with good reason. To me, what I noticed was like, David sells half of the company to MCA at the time, Universal.
David
Geffen, sorry. I get comfortable.
As you should.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Like, we had been in business with Warner Brothers, which was like a cultural total match. Like that Echo New Order, Juno's Jezebel tour, all three bands were being marketed to retail by the same people.
That makes it easy, one-stop shopping.
Exactly. Every month I'd get this package in the mail with all these posters for all these cool records. And for me, like in my job...
And they were actually records?
They were all records, yeah.
This was still vinyl?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say that vinyl being the dominant format for promoting records probably didn't... I mean, put it this way, like Teen Spirit was a 12-inch. Like, that's how it went to radio stations. It wasn't like there wasn't a CD at the time, but, I mean, it probably was right around then, like 93,
it was better quality
93.
still.
Couldn't even tell. It doesn't even make sense, because it isn't better quality at that point, really, for radio transmission.
Especially if you scratch it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, you left the record side of the business to become a manager. What prompted that?
First of all, there's one really important fact I left out of my decision to move back to Boston and start putting out records, which is that I didn't know that the world that I'd come from, that I was just talking about, the conventional record business from the old days, was about to fall off a cliff. It just happened to be bad timing in a way, because I was just struggling to get artists that I thought were great into the ether, and it happened from time to time. I mean, one of the things that was really good that happened was Steve Lamacq leaves the evening show at Radio 1 in the UK. Steve Lamacq, a guy I had worked with on a band called Elastica that I signed to Geffen that...
I promoted Elastica. They were
right
a CA act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hot girls.
Yeah.
Can't remember what they're saying, but they were pretty.
Connection.
Yeah, really incredible band.
Fuck you both. Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you is what I meant to say. It came out, fuck you.
Steve Lamacq was a partner in the UK label. So was Mike Smith, who is probably the #1 Britpop era music executive.
And there was a good run of it right around that same time.
Oh,
like Blur, and it was like the third generation of like bands coming over.
It was an incredible time, and working with that band was incredible. And what it opened me up to in that country, I'd always been an Anglophile, but all of a sudden I was in the thick of it. And it's a very small place. Even now it is. It's, when you actually go there and you spend time with people in the music business and, you're in it. It's wild when Blur and Oasis were in the same pub and they're about to compete for the #1 single, or, I don't know, crazy stuff like that.
I've become a fan of that recently in the last 5 or 6 years, where it's like London is not just something you think about doing, it's something you have to do at least once a year. And you see what's going on over there, because their trends are different than ours.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I'm scarred in a way, because that era was so unbelievable. I mean, my favorite year in music is 1981, and I was a senior in college, and I was music director of the college radio station, and I figured out I'm not going to go into politics.
Your favorite year in music was 1980.
Yeah.
Like, you knew that. You didn't even think of it. Like, you've thought this out.
Well,
it's like John Cusack in High Fidelity. It's like
Wow.
top 5 records from 1981 that you picked because she dumped you on a Tuesday. Like, Jesus Christ, man, that's awesome.
Well, we're all most influenced by things that happened to us at crucial ages. I turned 21 that year. But it isn't that. It's because I saw the Clash at Bonds at Times Square, which is the greatest gig I've ever seen, which again,
that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, well, I come from this scene. I'm so lucky that I was in Boston because a band like that would come over and play Boston and New York. Not them at that point, but the Jam came over and played Boston and New York, and they played the Channel.
Right, they might not do the whole country, but they're doing New York. They're going to do Boston
closer,
too.
Usually. There was another gig, and that's kind of the world that Mission of Burma came up in. And basically, they were my favorite band, and my first job was working at the record label. The lead singer developed tinnitus. They were really, really loud. So they stopped playing, and then 19 years later, they decided to reform, which they sort of dangled the idea at me, and it was one of the most forceful things I've ever done in business. I just said, you have to do this, and you have to do this with me, because I knew personally so many people it would matter to.
Bitch, don't tease me. Do this now.
Well, it was hilarious. Well, it ended up being a bigger deal than we imagined. It was great, and it was actually that was me.
Yeah, it's huge, but yeah, at that moment with the phone call, how big is this going to be? Who knows?
Right.
Do people remember? Do people care?
Well, I think that what Mark's saying is that he was beyond that point. It was like, it has to happen.
Well, I don't think that was about music or money, though. That was about you just wanting to hear them back together,
yeah.
right? Like that was the way it sounded to me personally. Was you personally wanted to see them on stage again?
Absolutely.
You didn't care if anyone else was in the club,
except that I knew everyone else that would be in
yeah.
the club. And the best analogy I can come up with, I really need a better one, is the Big Chill, where it was going to be that for this group of people. It ended up being in Boston, like, I don't know, 2,500 people or something, or 3,000 in 2 Irving Plazas, and I'm the manager, and I'm not a manager, and they're not a band. Like, that's kind of what it was like between all of us.
So that was
Oops,
the
this
first
is
one?
working. I guess I am a manager.
Yeah.
I'm a fucking genius.
Except that instead of pursuing that mentality, I put out records by people that no one ever heard of for a while. But yeah, eventually, to answer your question.
So you didn't follow that up with more management immediately. You stayed
Correct.
on the record side. This was just, I'm
But,
facilitating
well,
my friends to make sure this happens.
Interesting thing about Mission of Burma, and there's actually a documentary about that year. At the time, the fact that they were going to play it all had to be documented by certain people that were the people I was speaking for when I said that line. That was in 2002, and they're still around. Their original career was 1 album, 1 EP, and 2 singles, and they've put out 4 albums since 2003. And that's been bizarre, and we kind of replicated. I worked with Frank Riley, and in that particular case, because I knew him from that time, I didn't even think about that topic, not to get into promoters and agents and all that stuff. But it was kind of like, well, first of all, I thought we were booking 2 gigs. I still wanted to do it with Frank. I probably didn't have to, but I don't know if I knew Sam Kinkin yet, for example, who did the Irving Plaza shows.
Right.
Boston, I was relatively connected in.
Yeah, and I imagine somehow you would have found Jim Glassie's phone number if you couldn't find Kinkin's.
This was before them, I think. It was in 2002.
He wasn't part of whatever team became
He
Live
was
Nation?
part of what is now known as Live Nation. I
Yeah.
guess. But anyway, we digress.
Totally. Too much. It's a lot of history.
Oh,
going
but
on
to
there.
actually answer your question, which I haven't even approached,
But I'm fascinated. I'm having fun with this.
it's a lot of good stuff. Fortunately, it's great memories for me, and being here is the epitome of it because there's so many people that I've known through all this time and even beyond.
What's your second favorite year in music, by the way? It's
Probably 1980. I was going to see these bands at the Bayou, and it was like $5 to get in, except because I was the only person who had even heard of them that was anywhere near a radio signal that would reach anyone. It so happened ours didn't actually really reach anyone. So you go to see U2 at the Bayou, and there's probably about 150 people there.
Jesus.
2 shows. Might have been more. I don't want to
But it was.
one of my favorite bands of all time. I don't want
But
to
you weren't having a problem getting tickets.
No, whether you threw down the $5 or you were on the list like I was. And then inevitably, if you did have to buy tickets, you would always buy them for the first show because inevitably they would let you into the second show.
Right, because they just wanted you drinking.
Yeah, there weren't many people doing anything. U2, Bunnyman, Duran Duran was sold out. That one I remember. It was their second U.S. show. All this stuff's going on. You're in college. And by the way, I'm also going to see Springsteen and the Dead and the Stones. And, it's an interesting thing because on paper, someone who's like influenced by punk and came from that world, and ultimately it's my biggest inspiration, I would say, like culturally and especially business-wise. On paper, that person is not going to Dead shows or God knows what else. I've found that the forces in the music business, especially the same era of record companies that I speak of so fondly, always would underestimate the audience. And I'll never forget driving home from work at Geffen one day when Edie Brickell and Guns N' Roses were both in the top 10. And, that meant that some people were actually buying both records. If you sat in the meetings where really brilliant people were talking about these artists, and I'm not even really being disparaging of Geffen, it's more about the marketing mentality of record companies, which is one reason why they're gone. That wouldn't be possible, and yet it was there. And fortunately, we got things like SoundScan and BDS to level the playing field. And now we have complete anarchy, and it's exciting.
So you're moving from the world of anarchy and records.
Right. Still haven't answered the question. So my old boss, Bill Bennett, was managing the Secret Machines, and it was a man I really liked. And he tried to get me to co-manage them, but he really wasn't telling me things about them that were inspiring me to help him out. But I really liked their music, and he's like, look, I'm taking this job to run Warner Nashville. I actually need to find someone to manage the band. I had to go to LA within a certain period of time to do it, and I wasn't able to, but I realized I wanted to, and that was kind of what psychologically moved me in the direction of being a manager. There's someone very important to me that would not want me to be talking about on this podcast or anywhere else in public, who I worked with really closely on a lot of artists, and that's Sean Silva. To me, he was the manager, and I was the A&R guy, and that worked really well. And, I didn't name all the artists that you wanted me to name, but we worked together on Sonic Youth, Nirvana, Beck. Hole was managed by Gold Mountain. I was their A&R person some of the time. And to me, it wasn't like he was the only manager I knew. It wasn't like he was the only great manager that I knew, but we came up at the same time. We were bonded by our love for the Boston Red Sox, and not being able to fathom the way my great friend operated honestly kind of discouraged me from it, which was really stupid. So I got over that, and I was trying to do a record with this band. Actually, I was being asked to do a record by a band called The Cribs, who I now work with.
Great band.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. I did become a manager in one night at South by Southwest. It's actually true. I was trying to help my friend Michael Jobson, a.k.a. Curly, who anyone who's ever been in a venue from a production side knows. I knew him originally as the Bunnymen's roadie and spare guitarist. Then I worked with him in my record company role as he was tour manager for Susie and the Banshees. He was tour manager for Hole on Lollapalooza, which is a whole other...
Yeah, that was a shit show.
Well, Hole were one of 4 bands that I was the A&R person for that were on that tour. And that, to me, was one of the most incredible things that's ever
It
happened.
was the same year Pavement was there, right?
Yes.
Sonic Youth.
Yep.
This is the year Nirvana was supposed to headline.
Well, no, it was 95, so...
Okay, so this is a year or two
yeah,
later. Sorry.
Anyway, it was Sonic Youth, Hole, Beck, and Elastica. So, okay.
I'm listening to you.
We're talking about
Even
Curly.
if you're not listening to
Curly
you.
on that tour, as tour manager for Hole, really had a very challenging job, particularly on the first night when Courtney punched Kathleen Hanna.
Really?
And that was at the Gorge, yeah. I mean, Lollapalooza was such a special thing. No, but that didn't come off the right way. I'm looking at Jamie, and I'm saying Lollapalooza was such a
applauding
special
you.
thing, and she knows why.
I know
and you were right in the
exactly
middle
why.
of it. And
Yes.
because to go way, way back, it's funny. Like, we were talking about Lollapalooza, and then I talk about that Bunnyman tour. The real point was that tour went into venues that might not have accepted the idea of it, right? And the second show was at Pine Knob, and we got there, and there's 14,000 kids there in 1987 at that lineup. And we're like, wow, we're actually right. Like, this is what we're doing. This is the music we're pushing. This is all we care about. It doesn't mean it's actually going to work. And we needed signs like that.
I think that Palooza and Horde and Warped Tour themselves, too, changed the industry on that same point because there were massive promoters that operated the sheds that had to do those shows. But they learned a lot of them couldn't produce those shows. They weren't cool enough to do Warped, and they weren't cool enough to do the early Palooza dates, and they had to work in the local guys like Doug Kaufman in Denver at NIP and the Monkey guys in the Northwest
And
that
Vince
were
Bannon
able
and
to
Ritual.
identify who were, in Detroit, Ritual. They were able to identify the audience below the top 2 bands headlining the show. There was this moment where it was like, okay, those guys that do Neil Diamond don't necessarily know how to find the Violent Fen fan.
I mean, what you just said there is everything about what I care about, because I came from this world where the only people that would even pay attention to these bands are, some of them are people like Seth Hurwitz. And being in D.C., going to the old 930, even like before him, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, to me, like, that's a guy that I came up with. And I was a promoter for one show in Washington, which I will just mention, which was Public Image Women
I
and Minor
remember
Threat.
that.
Washington State?
Washington, D.C. It was Halloween night, 1982. It wasn't a disaster, but it was not successful. And we didn't know what we were doing, and it was a really good thing that I did that because...
You told me that story.
Yeah, well, it looks incredible on paper, and it was...
I
it
bet
was
I
very
could sell
cool,
that show in this market right now.
Right. Especially if Minor Threat refuses to be paid because they were so uncomfortable with the idea of it, which is just genius. I was so into going to gigs that I thought I should be in the promotion business, and that one experience made me realize how wrong I was. And I'm so lucky that I was even able to find a job working creatively with artists at all, because even then there wasn't that much of it. And
And the borders to entry even back then were ridiculously hard.
Yeah. And,
I mean, everybody wants to touch a little fame and get paid to do it.
Absolutely. And, I'm lucky. When I was in high school, I started answering the phones at WBCN, which is the progressive rock station in Boston. And I thought I was going to have a career in the music business. It's because it was more interesting than just listening. And I got to be around this culture that I was talking about earlier that it's hard to explain. But if you were there at the time, you could feel it. And this network was happening. Like when you talk about the promoters that had to be involved with those shows because they knew the culture. I mean, that's really what it is. These were the beginnings.
And this is before having the email list. Like there was an email list. It was just knowing.
Yeah, this is like me going to a payphone at the Back Bay Hilton and calling Jefferson Holt because I knew him and I knew REM. They were the first band I ever met that I got to know personally that were successful, just in case he needed to hire anybody.
And REM was a band? No, just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, believe me. I learned everything from them, by the way. Like, I'm so lucky because I get to work with artists that I feel are part of a lineage that they're part of. And it's not an exaggeration to say that REM taught U2 things at that time. Like, that's kind of what was going on. When I said before we had to kill classic rock, like, we had to create our own world. And that's why I feel so strongly about the original independent promoters who supported this music, or really, to be honest, any promoter who supported this music, because it was a challenge. And it's great to be ahead of your time. It's not necessarily the most lucrative way to approach things. And then you learn about it. You have the experience more than once. And this is not me patting myself on the back. Like, to be told that I have great ears by Andy Summers is an amazing compliment. But when I did Antarctic F, and Eddie Rosenblatt said to us once in a meeting, he's like, as long as you guys know about everything, you're going to get your share. So if we don't get something, it's actually not going to be held against you. If we don't know about something, it might.
That's when the shit hits the fan.
Right.
So identifying that Head and Heart's going to be cool, having those tools, knowing that is one thing. Not ever seeing it coming is another.
Right. I have a friend who was a professional baseball player who did really well, and I remember her saying to me once, you guys have no idea how much luck comes into the equation. Now, that's something that involves human beings doing physical activity. This is way more abstract than that. So, luck, circumstance. The good news is, I think in a way, there's more room for that than there's ever been. I'm still getting used to the environment of releasing music that is being sold to people without the part of it being sold being a priority anymore. Like, that wasn't the case the last time MGMT released an album, for example, which was 3 years ago.
That's a band you happen to work with.
Yes, I'm very lucky to work with. I think, our job is to try to anticipate this stuff. But again, sometimes you can be so early that you actually miss it. Just like some of the bands that are most successful are the ones that are most derivative. And the ones they're derivative of don't necessarily ever get what some of us might think they deserve.
You said something that I want to go back to because it was, I think, really interesting, and I want to know the answer to this. You said that you were asked to come out to Los Angeles during a specific period of time and that you couldn't go, but you found yourself wanting to go. Were you surprised by that?
No, it was more like, I'm really glad I figured this out. I was a reluctant A&R person too, and I already was one. I was an idiot about it. I mean, it's just a weird thing. Like, I think we all have moments in life where there's something sitting right in front of us, and we know it's sitting right in front of us, but somehow it doesn't quite feel right or real or some bizarre combination of that, and I've tried to get better about it. And that's why I said that thing today in the meeting, which was incredibly simplistic about, instead of replacing someone, like, just rethinking everything that you're doing, which is what you should be doing every time you make a decision, especially with a tiny independent business. And I'm so not a business head. It's funny because one of the things I'm most into about where I live is the brain power and having access to it and putting time in. And there's this group of people that I spend time with at Harvard Business School that don't interact with anything that's street level is what I do, other than, I suppose food truck entrepreneurs and things like that. But the magic of our business, what keeps a lot of us in it when so many haven't even been able to survive in it, is that there's this mystery, however you want to put it. There's something that happens that's very unique to music and very unique to live music. And, thank God. And it's funny because while there's so much change, it's only made that experience, it seems more valuable. All the stuff we're talking about here was unimaginable until very recently, and seems to be room for almost everybody. I mean, it's almost like that's the problem, is that there's room for anything that moves, and a lot of it maybe shouldn't be judged based on anything more than it being able to move.
I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, there's certainly a lot of different fields that are profitable and you're able to work in, but I think there's a lot of schlock that just fails, and I know that because I get the emails from every last shitty agency that exists that want to have the Toots and the Maytolds tribute band come play my venues, and it's just, there is shit out there. It's not.
Well, but I think that that's also what Mark's trying to say is that that there's a plethora of shit out there. And if you don't know enough to be able to see the forest through the trees, that, yeah, any Joe Blow, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm going to be in the music business. I think for someone to be successful in this business, it takes a certain breed. You have to have a certain stamina. And I don't think that we're on every tree.
We're all kind of amazing nerds, too. It's just like Saturday night, we're at a conference talking about music. We had dinner with music people. And not only did we not get enough music talk while we were doing that, we're hiding in a hotel room and not doing drugs, but talking about music in a little hotel room while we record this podcast. So there's something super nerdy about us that we all get off on this, but it's totally entertaining to me. And I mean that in the best possible way. Because if we were to sneak off 15 years ago, it would be to go do blow. Just a total different day in the industry.
Yeah, I don't know. For some reason, I can't shake it. I can't imagine shaking it. In some ways, I wish I could just balance it a little less in my life, but I'm too into it. And one of the best things about where I live is actually, I was going to go back to something I started to talk about earlier, which is the series that we curate. Through that lens, I see a lot about what goes on in booking at the 550 capacity club level. And there's too many things happening for too many reasons, and not all of them are real, shall we say. They aren't based on demand by consumers. And I worry about it from the consumer standpoint. I mean, yeah, I can't fathom growing up with the entire history of recorded music on your phone. But I just think how people make decisions about going out and seeing music is hard to relate to. Like, I have this friend, this guy I watch soccer matches with, who really likes to see live music, but can't imagine spending $200 to go to TD Garden to see a major headliner at Gillette Stadium or something like that. He actually just wants to see live music. You know, it's sobering in a way, because it's like that's actually what most people would just like to be entertained. I wasn't here the year that Anita Elbersy did her thing, but I did read that book, and obviously I'm more of a long tail guy myself. But one of the interesting things about that book is one of the main subjects of it, that it was written around, it involved an artist and manager, and really not someone I wanted to disparage, even on whatever level this podcast is, who got fired about a week, whatever level, I don't even know.
Yeah.
Who got fired a week after the book came out. So, yes, one of the points in her book is some incredible percentage of all albums released sell one copy. I mean, does that mean that someone doesn't even have a family member or like a friend, or you know what I mean? Like,
Is that an actual thing that some albums literally just sell one
apparently,
copy?
according to that book, and she's pretty well researched from what I can tell. I actually went to meet her because I couldn't be here and I wanted to, and she's down.
Because you could record an album and your parents would buy it.
That's right. Well, if you're smart enough to ask them to. I mean, the fact that it's a volume, I mean, whatever.
I'd have to probably help them.
Has no place in this podcast.
No, I'd probably have to help my parents download it on their phone, but like they'd buy it.
I was here for that, and she is an incredibly smart woman, and she had some very poignant points. But I think some of the issues with some of the people that we've had speak at this conference before, like Michael Moore, and there are things that apply, and then there are things that just don't. And, you know, Michael Moore is talking about how he thinks that pirated music is great for everyone, and then it's like, okay, well,
The room
dude,
didn't love that.
well, question was, okay, what if somebody gets your script early? He's like, oh, no. Definitely not. Dude, what's the difference? And
well, the pirated music argument, if you think about it now, it's funny, right? All I can tell you is that in my experience, there's a lot that was going on that was very positive for artists. There's a really interesting book about juxtaposes Doug Morris, a guy who is in the record leaking thing, like almost just because he was into it, but happened to work at a CD manufacturing plant in North Carolina. The third thing was about, I think, the guy that originally created the MP3. It reads sort of like a mystery. Pretty interesting. But so much of what happens is not determined by whatever the forces of the music business are. And one thing that came up in the conversation with Bob yesterday, the major record companies who really did dominate the music landscape when Napster showed up, it was a business dominated by these companies, basically ignored it and thought that like legal channels would help them. And I found myself in a major in poli-sci and working Capitol Hill, and I decided the people around me were not people I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And
So you're going to go into politics?
Absolutely.
Elected office?
It wasn't my goal. My goal
Not
was
at this
to just,
point. I get that that's
well,
off the table.
no, that wasn't. I grew up in Lexington, Mass., where the first battle of the American Revolution was fought. And I was always into history, and I was into the cultural politics. And in Massachusetts, perennially, it's kind of a high art. At that time, Massachusetts politicians had a lot of influence on Capitol Hill. Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. I interned for Paul Tsongas, who was my congressman, became senator, eventually ran for president. Fortunately, I realized how rare and special this guy was, who I got to interact with very occasionally, but was kind of representing to his voters, his constituents. And once I realized that most of it was a joke, and most of it was being done by people from a truly professional standpoint. It's like any business. A lot of people do things to make a living. Well, in politics, it's, as we have never seen more than today, it's really dangerous. Anyway, so I got into college radio. I was going to gigs the whole time, and I just realized this is actually what I wanted to do. And I think I'm a big advocate of kids these days going to college without knowing what they want to do, because to me, that's a big part of the experience. It's also becoming rarer and rarer.
I don't know that you can even do that anymore. I mean, I went to college undeclared, and I don't think that you can actually do that.
You go through
anymore.
your first year undeclared.
Can you?
Yeah, I think so, in general. It's just not that common.
My step's younger than yours. So let's jump ahead a little bit. MGMT's, which you're most successfully known for at the moment, clearly on the management side. How did that come to be?
Good story. Involves another one-time Aspenite. So MGMT formed at Wesleyan University, I think around 2003. It was two guys that started making music, wrote and recorded two of their three biggest songs, just screwing around. And that music became available on an EP that was known to some people, but didn't really reach people. But it did have both Time to Pretend and Kids on it. They graduated, they went their separate ways. They weren't really in touch with each other. It was like any kind of thing that you do in college and then you move on. And then they got discovered. And at the time, an employee of mine was also a scout at Columbia, so he was in the A&R meeting, and he let me know about them. And I started playing Kids when I DJ'd, and I could tell that some people that were there actually knew the song. I'm not going to say I had this great vision or anything, because the truth is I went to see Maureen Kenny, who signed them, because Nick Palmacci, who worked for me, had been in the A&R meeting, and I liked what I heard. And Kids is a pretty obvious song, obviously easy to say now, but if you heard that earlier version in 2006, which is what we're talking about.
Quite different?
No, not quite different. That's the thing. I believe there's a thing that can happen in university environments. There's a lot of successful artists that can say this, that can spring from a school or a cluster of schools where kids are virally connected. It's a relatively recent phenomenon. It was pointed out to me that that's kind of what happened with OAR. I suppose it happened with Fish in a very different way, but in a digital way, it's more like what I'm talking about. Like the first time Rah Rah Riot played Boston, they were third on a bill at the Middle East, and there were a lot of people there to see them because they formed at Syracuse University. And they're not the biggest band in the world, but they've had a following because it started with their friends, which is how anything should start. And this is what I mean.
It was organic and it happened for real.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is Northeastern liberal arts schools are, in my mind, this is almost like a trade secret, except it'd be pretty hard to follow up. There's a community there that things can spring from. And Wesleyan alone has produced all kinds of people. I mean, they have forever, but the era that this band came from, people that they worked with on videos that went on to become big directors, and even other musicians. Francis and the Lights, like that's a guy that they took on tour that we actually worked with for a while, who's finally reaching people in the way that he always could have. And he didn't actually spend that much time at Wesleyan, but he went there and those guys met. And
it almost seems like a given. There's so many colleges in the Northeast so close together that working college alone would have been a brilliant blueprint for breaking young bands.
Well, when I met Dispatch, they really didn't know what they were doing, but they were getting gigs any way they could. They played at prep schools. That worked for them. Those kids went on to colleges, became part of their rep program where they were selling CDs to other kids. And I saw these models going on, and I knew that people in LA had no idea, even though like people in LA, and I'm not saying this because he's my favorite artist or anything, but like they didn't appreciate where Dave Matthews was at literally until he played Dodger Stadium. People in the music business in LA. I'm at least partially guilty, except I live in Boston where he was selling out multiple Foxborough stadiums at the same time. But what I didn't realize, because we all think we know what we're doing, was that there were actually models going on there that had nothing to do with the world that I was in, and it was really eye-opening.
Similar to the John Mayer model where he was selling CDs out of his trunk.
Exactly. One of the things that I could have done after leaving Grand Royal was go to work at V2, which was starting in the U.S., and my friend Andy Gershon asked me if I was interested in doing A&R there, and I didn't do that, but I helped them try to sign Howie Day, and that was someone who Don Van Cleve had actually brought to Grand Royal when I was still there, and that was part of why I thought I could put records out, because I was stockpiling all this music. Most of it was never going to get released. I mean, the Beastie Boys had pretty strong aesthetics, pretty strong feelings about what they wanted. And
they pretty hands-on on that?
I mean, honestly, Mike was the most hands-on, but in terms of the aesthetic, if you're that artist, you're influencing culture on a daily basis, literally without even trying. Not to say they didn't try sometimes, but when you're like that, it's pretty innate. Like, Mike would be able to speak for the other two about most things involving business.
So was he the business mind of the three of them?
Definitely. But I mean, I think it's a little unfair to the other two, whether I think that Horowitz was such an artist, had made his own records on Grand Royal.
And they could clearly all write. I mean, they could clearly all write.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot speak in any way like unbiased about that band.
But they all had their different focuses.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, Mike was absolutely the business head of those three guys. But, you know, I was there at the end. Grand World started because they wanted their friends Luscious Jackson to get their record released. And that happened. And, you know, Capitol gave them a deal. And
So they made an imprint so they could help out their friends?
yeah, again, the influence of everything that was going on that emanated from those guys, I mean, it just blows my mind. I can't even...
You would think the label would just sign a band based on them saying, please do this.
Well, in a way, that's what happened. You know, the problem is ultimately artist labels are almost never successful in the end. And it's because they're being done for the right reason. They're not being done to generate revenue, you know, and return on the investment and all the things. You know, again, I come from this era where if I wanted to sign something, I didn't really get resistance. If the deal became difficult, I might be pushed on it a little bit. But we were given, this is at Geffen I'm talking about, just incredibly free reign to do what we wanted. And for me, we had created this community of artists in the world that I came from of alternative music. And to me, it was just about involving the best and most talented people from that community, or the ones that I felt strongly about. What was great is that they all wanted to be there anyway. The records that they were buying were on that label. And it was just an amazing thing. And by the way, like, we weren't the only place that had their own community. We weren't the only place doing this. Warner Brothers and Sire were doing it way before us and did their own version of the same thing. But it's community is something I really feel strongly about. It's what I try to build my little business around.
Okay, so let's talk about the great story that was you signing MGMT.
It was basically something I was pursuing for a while. It was something over the course of about 6 months that I was checking in with Maureen Kenny, the A&R person. Well, the first thing I had to do was call their attorney, Peter Lewitt, who I was well aware of, but he and I had never met or even spoken.
Really?
And, yeah, it's funny because
He's an Aspenite.
Yeah, it's true. Well, much of my career involved Richard Grable, who was on the other side of a wall from him at the same firm. And because Grable was Sonic Youth's attorney, and that was a whole thing that would not have happened at Geffen, I don't think, if it weren't for Richard and, you know, our ability to communicate with him. By the way, they were the band that really created that community. So I called Peter Lewitt, and it's funny because we have so many people in common and we know who each other are. And I get the meeting and I sit down with these guys, and the first thing they said was, "You might not like us, we're weird." And I'm like, okay, my wife went to Wesleyan. I'm friends with Amanda Palmer. And it's a little unfair to throw what they consider their weirdness to be back at them in the form of Wesleyan, but it is why they existed. In the end, they couldn't decide between my partner, Dave Gottlieb, and I, and they didn't realize that we knew each other. I don't think. And if they did, they didn't realize that we knew each other well, had hung out together. Aspen was a place where we actually reconnected after not being in touch for a while and asked us if we'd do it together. And that was that. And that was 2007. And they were a cool young band that had great songs, of which I had worked with dozens in my life that weren't successful. And, you know, I thought if people could hear this stuff, it'll probably work. And that's the whole thing. If people can hear
That's the key.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up, you've discovered that if people hear this, it could be big. How do you take that from the point of, I see it, and now the world has? How did you get it from the point of you seeing it could to making the world notice that? Or what was the outlet for you to try that?
What I like to say is they went on tour with Montreal and things just started happening. And, you know, radio stations started playing Time to Pretend. It had not been serviced. There wasn't even a, you know...
That happened organically?
Yes. And when that happened, and it began right around this time in 2007, it was in December. I think it was the week after Aspen. I didn't think it was possible anymore. I didn't think that, like, this format that was such a big part of my life. I mean, at that time, yeah, well, it had been through the Fred Durstification of, you know, destroying our music and somehow come out the other end. Yeah, it wasn't a given at all. I mean, the whole deregulation radio world was in effect and consultants and all this stuff. And this happened aside from all that. Indie 103 played it. K-Rock started playing it. It just grew. It sounds simple now, but a lot of people worked really, really hard on behalf of that band and have continued to at Columbia and at Sony around the world. So it's important that what I say does not in any way take away from that. But these guys made music that hit a nerve at the right moment. And again, radio was a big part of it. And you know what? File sharing was a big part of it because at that time it was still a thing. We put the record out early because they were going on that tour with Montreal. I had another great Aspen thing to call Don Van Cleve to get him to take it. It wasn't easy. When it finally came out for real, the soft release was in probably September 2007. The real release was late January 2008. The week it came out, like, he's calling me going, "It's top 10, dude." I'm like, well, I'm glad you took some. I mean, and you know, it wasn't like I knew it was going to be top 10, by the way. Things just kept happening with them because people were communicating with each other about them. And I mean, this is MySpace still in 2007.
The social media had started though, so that's a format though.
What's that?
Social media had started.
It
MySpace
had.
was
No,
a
it
thing.
had. And I think it benefited them. And I think, who knows?
That was the upside. Now we're stuck with Dane Cook, so that's the downside.
Your question is, even in their case, is so much broader. I guess my point is that EP was played in an A&R meeting at Columbia by a kid that was a scout that didn't have anything newer to play, but it was new to most of the people in that room. And they heard it as something that sounded big to them in the future, and that actually happened. It's a challenge when an artist has big hit singles around the world in their first album, and then the entire intelligentsia of the world that thinks it controls what people like and don't like decide that the next record can't be anything. Well, whatever. It's a difficult second album. It's an amazing experience to have, kind of as a manager, for lack of a better way of putting it. But those guys aren't really about doing the same thing twice. And the music that they're working on is exciting. I think the most important thing is we all think we know everything. Increasingly, anything we know, like I said earlier today, is less relevant. To see things happen organically in that period of time was really exciting because streaming wasn't a thing. Downloads were barely a thing. It was weird. And you go through this career, goalposts move all the time. Sometimes they move back, sometimes they move forward. Right now, to me, if music is being determined by streaming, I think that's exciting. I think it gives people that actually care about it the most potential influence. Doesn't mean that it allows for the most potential corruption or that it doesn't, but it's a lot better than chains of radio stations and opinionated music journalists, many of whom I love and respect. But the audience has been in charge of this since Napster, really, since like digital music kind of opened things up. And
So
I
do
think
you
that's
think
good.
at the end of the day, music being stolen or out there for everyone in the masses, whether the bands decided that it was going to happen or did overall, is better for the band that the music has just gotten out there because there's so many ways to distribute it?
I can't say no because it's like you can't stop progress.
Agreed.
The audience, it's like Bob likes to say, the label should have bought Napster. Well, you can't say that's wrong.
Bob
It was-
Lefsetz.
Yes, it was unfathomable at the time. And that's an important thing to remember. This is a time where the labels were represented by the RAA. It was a heavily political thing. It's not that simple. And I had this experience right after the Monday and Tuesday after I left Grand Royal. I was in Washington with the guys from Dispatch who were playing a show for Napster that happened between Mike the Goon McGinley and I. Basically, Sean Fanning heard the music and really liked it, and the band were a Napster success story. That was kind of a thing I left out. I'm in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room sitting with the guys from Dispatch and Sean Fanning and Chuck D, and sitting across the aisle is Ken Berry, who ran Virgin, who was paying my salary prior to that week, and Don Henley and Sheryl Crow and like the established music business. And yet in front of us was the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they make the law. And, Orrin Hatch, whatever he is a recording artist and actually understands these issues from that standpoint, which is a weird thing for a Mormon Republican from Utah to be doing. But what it illustrates is that, like, these people make the law. It's a terrifying thing to say right now, but it pushed a lot of buttons in me because I had that political experience and I hadn't been up there in a long time. And I think that was a time where the genie was out of the bottle and it was never going to come back.
I mean, because obviously MGMT radio successfully.
Yeah. Look, the greatest influence on music purchasing, now we know
What
that
is?
that might not matter. Radio.
Okay.
Terrestrial radio. But it doesn't influence what's actually influencing people listening to music the most. And to me, like, to think about any one of my clients putting out music in this environment, it's exciting because the curators that I know at these digital services have good taste. And, to be fair, there's a lot of people that I know I can reach directly, like you guys. And that gives anything I'm working on a better chance.
Well, but also I have to think that if the major record labels had gone in and bought Napster, they would have tried to put a stranglehold on it. And so they would have tried to shut it down. They would have tried to keep a stronghold on it. And that's not the way that the internet works. It's not the way that social media works. And so it would have gotten away from them regardless.
But one way they could have put a stranglehold on it was to create subscription, which people were talking about then,
Yes.
And I mean,
Especially because of all the viruses and everything else, everybody was really looking for that safe way to download
Right.
music.
And by the way, let's keep in mind, this is before the iPod existed. The iPod existed for a while before iTunes. Well, originally iTunes wasn't even available for non-Macs.
Right.
And I think the timeline of all this stuff's really important, but the bottom line is they ignored it. This guy in Germany was creating a file
1,000%.
And, some of us were trying, again, if you work in alternative music, you're always looking for people. If you work in any music, I suppose you are, but people are out there. And social media is effective, but again, there's so much noise. And what influences any one human being, there's, billions of different answers to that. What I like about it is that it keeps changing. The audience is actually determining what works and what doesn't. And again, to me, if you're going to assume that enough human beings have good taste for great music to provide a career for the people who make it and the people who help them get it out there, then there's no reason why things can't be better than they've ever been. I am an optimist. That's probably pretty obvious. But I know how important this is. I talk to people every day about how important it is to them emotionally. And it's clearly important to all of us emotionally because we wouldn't be sitting here and this poor guy is.
Great, and I want to appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I think we just scratched the surface and there's more discussions to be had with you.
I'm down. Yeah, that's the way I feel. I don't think I finished a single anecdote, but I did my best.
It was a good time. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Jamie.
Yes.
That's it for episode 10 of Promoter 101. Next week, we're going to be airing Dan's interview with AG Live's CEO, Jay Marciano, recorded during the Aspen Live Conference.
And you can follow Luke at WLukePierce and me at The Jew on Twitter.
Be sure to subscribe to Promoter 101 wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you liked our stuff, or even if you hated it, drop us a review. We want to know what you think.
You can also email us your thoughts at steiny@promoter101.net.
I'm Luke Pierce, and for my partner Steiny, we're wishing you a great week ahead.
Have fun traveling, guys. See you soon.
Cheers.
Hey, this is Charlie from Crescent Ballroom, Stateside Presents, and the new Van Buren Theater. I'll be a guest on Promoter 101 when I attend my first Polestar Live, and hopefully I'm alive to tell you all about it.